I thought that last point about scaling up and scaling out is a great way to introduce our next speaker. Vahe Torossian has been an executive with Microsoft since almost before I was born. I used to work for Vahe as when we were a team back in Microsoft Central and Eastern Europe. Had a lot of good times together. And it's a pleasure, Vahe, to have you here today, and thank you again for contributing both to this part of the conference and to tomorrow. So please take it away.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so old now. Well, thank you very much. It looks like the slides are gone, so let's start from, you just think about slides and then I will go for it. It's really a great pleasure to be here, and it happens that that was the week I was in Seattle because I've been living 6.5 years here, and I'm back now in Europe, out of Paris. So it was great when Pierre gave me this opportunity to come. And actually, everything in life is a matter of prioritization. At the same time I'm speaking, I'm skipping, in fact, Satya Nadella's speech to the leaders, of the company, somewhere in Redmond. But I felt that I couldn't refuse and decline the invitation of Pierre here. Thank you, Christine, for the very inspiring thoughts. I think at the core of many of the topics that you shared, or the learning, I think there's something around the humility, that you have to carry as leaders, as companies, as countries, to go through, in fact, the changes that are happening because of technology, and it's an interesting and important thing for Microsoft, to take care of, and as responsible leaders. What I've been asked to cover to some degree today is a perspective of a global company, and let's say Microsoft as an example. I'm not that old, by the way, Anyway, time flies. But to give a perspective of a global company such as Microsoft when it comes to engaging with the Nordic countries, and in my role, I'm blessed to have a big part of Western Europe, and the Nordics, of course, countries are part of it. So first, I felt that it's it works. I felt that I should start very, very shortly to give what we stand for as a company, because it's important that the mission statement to some degree summarize everything we do and the way we behave. And the mission that you have here behind me, which is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more, is really something that we take at heart in the 197 countries that we are operating in the world. And truly, in fact, of course, technology is fueling, in fact, this mission. But more importantly, I think what is important is how we are infusing trust with the technology that we are implementing and launching in the countries in full partnership. The trust is an important word. Christine mentioned it. I think, and the public debate of the last few weeks has even more reinforced the importance of trust in what we do and what we do. And in fact, when I was listening to the speaker, Christine, I was really thinking about technology. It's not about what technology can do, but really what technology should do to some degree to make a difference today and in the coming years. Microsoft, is now focusing a lot of time on what we call the artificial intelligence, and many of you have been touching it, know it more or less, heard about it, and we think that this is an exciting opportunity from a society perspective, as we see the promises to transform every business, to improve every life, and have the opportunity to really fix or solve some of the biggest challenges of the society. Of course, at the same time, we should also note about the challenges that are associated to it. We think that broadly, in fact, the AI promises and advances will have far more, in fact, benefits than challenges, but it's worth taking a few seconds to reflect on the responsibilities of these very few technology companies that Christine mentioned, that have a stronger and even more responsibility than ever. And that's why somehow, in fact, the way we started to engage over the last few years, and it's not about the last 3 years, 3 or 4 years, it has started in fact, truly in year 2000 when Bill Gates himself have started to put security and trustworthy computing at the heart of what we do when it comes to development. And it's true that today when you think about the principles that the technology company should take as a whole, but also of course, specifically in the Nordic countries when it comes to engagement, there are a few critical words where you have to stand very, very, very strongly to make the difference and to be seen as a trusted advisor. One of them being transparency, security, privacy, compliance. And with the AI development, even more about ethics. Inclusiveness are critical components that not necessarily, in fact, major global technology companies have in mind. Actually, the ones who have less it in mind are the ones who are coming from the consumer side. Because when you have been running your business with only businesses or government, you know what means security. You need what it means to be certified. You need what it means to make sure that when you access the data, you make a difference between your data and their data. And data are always the data of our customers. So these are very critical principle things that, of course, are important to note. Of course, skills are going to be critically important to reflect on. I mean, in some of the very recent conferences, it has been clear that 60% of the kids today who are at very early stage at school will have jobs that don't exist today. And when you look at the evolution, from the World Economic Forum, in only 5 years perspective, on the ranking of the top skills that are required to navigate in this new environment, you can see, and it's interesting to be in this beautiful, art museum, which, is obviously reflecting innovation and creativity, how higher creativity ranks now on the top 10 skills or areas of, let's say, development, compared to what it was only in 2015 as a number 10th of the list here. The Microsoft in the Nordics, it's interesting, we were talking about the duration of age or when I started. Actually, I started in 1992, so 26 years ago. Yes, it's some time. But we started the first investment from a subsidiary or branch office in the Nordics in Sweden back in 1985. So a bit more than 30 years ago. And at the time where, if you think Microsoft was about 1,000 people, 1,000 employees worldwide. And just to give a perspective, we are now about 120,000, so 120 times more than in 1985. But, it was already a place where Microsoft, was willing to invest for many, many reasons. And actually, interesting enough, the reason that we choose in 1985 are basically the same than the one that we are keeping investing in the Nordics regions today. If you summarize, many of these have been said, and it looks obvious, but it's not that obvious when you are someone who have been traveling in 127 countries in the last 7 years. It's not that obvious to have a concentration of, let's say, technology-savvy countries, population, open economy, stable political environment, government support when it comes to innovation and development. Some of the things also, and Birger has been a great partner, of mine, and I have a lot of, let's say, Nordic, great talents, working around me or for me, or I'm blessed to partner with them. Is also the fact that, the education system is bringing almost a bilingual, natural, let's say, skill set. That is a very, a very strong asset when it comes to embracing different type of culture and having a mobile, almost mindset when it comes to driving opportunities ahead and developing assets and wealth. So that's something that has been, in fact, true in 1985, increasing over time, still very true in today's world. The one thing also which is, interesting is that very few people know that if I take all the investment that Microsoft has done over the years, the place, the geography after North America, where we did the biggest number of investments, have been in the Nordics. And when you think about the few companies, as an example on the bottom of this slide, have been more than $20 billion of investment, with these type of companies in the world, creating, in fact, wealth, for Microsoft, globally as well. And you can see many of them here. The interesting thing as well is that when you look at what it means today for Microsoft in the Nordics, of course we are covering the five countries, but it's got more than 2,000 employees. And the interesting thing is that beyond the 13 offices that we have across the countries, we have increasingly developed a mix that is a quite unique mix in comparison to many other countries, the exception of the US, and you will understand why. It's the mix between sales, marketing, operation type of employees and what I will call the R&D or development centers. The mix is today about 60-40, 60 for sales, marketing, operations, and 40% when it comes to technology and R&D and PhDs working there in multiple areas, such as the business application or the advanced search, for example, or even, in fact, following an acquisition that we have done in Sweden a few years back, all development that we do around the mixed reality, such as the HoloLens environment for us, has been sourced, from Sweden today. And even so, if you push yourself in the future, some of the investment that we are doing in quantum computing will be done out of Denmark, in Copenhagen, in partnership with different universities in Copenhagen, in Sydney, and in Amsterdam, in addition to, in fact, of course, the R&D labs of Microsoft Corporation. So this is to show you that, over time, the linkage between the talent pool based on all the skill set I just mentioned earlier on, and, in fact, how we are thinking about investing in these countries to develop wealth is also, in fact, a good demonstration of what we are doing and continuing to do. The organizations are based on people, and I couldn't, have this presentation without showing you the faces of people. And I think some of them, I don't know if Joachim has already arrived, but I think these are the four, let's say, leaders that I'm blessed to work every day with, who are in care, charging and in charge of the Nordics region. Marianne for Denmark and Iceland, and Pekka for Finland, Kimberley for Norway, and Joachim for Sweden. The interesting thing is that in the dynamic of creating wealth in a given country, and especially when it comes to the Nordics, we always had a principle of not only, in fact, investing directly in the country, and with an increasing and absolutely unique mix of 60-40 between sales, marketing, again, as I said, and R&D, but also, in fact, for an ecosystem of partners that are really developing wealth based on the technology or the platform that we are having. And it's interesting to note that it's about, in the combined Nordic region, we count about 10,000 partners today, very different type of, let's say, profile, who are, let's say, covering the needs of our customers. And these 10,000 partners are employing about 180,000 people across the Nordics. The one thing that we have been very diligent over the years is that how much, let's say, one employee investment that Microsoft does in the company create, in fact, jobs overall. And for every one employee that we are printing to some degree in the Nordics, it's about 19 employees that have been let's say created by the partner ecosystem. And last is our thing that we have been doing every year, which are called the economical study impact. Is more about, let's say, how much value the partner ecosystem or the ecosystem or the ICT environment is creating for every $1 that Microsoft is doing and generating in the countries. And for the Nordics, it's for every $1 that Microsoft does, $6 are made by the ecosystem. So that gives you a kind of perspective. I think that the very interesting thing is, and obviously this slide doesn't summarize all the companies that we have, and you have, and you can see, in the Nordics. But it's just a few examples that exemplify again what we are talking about. Yes, maybe these are smaller countries. Some of you said that earlier on, but look at, in fact, the image, reputation, and impact of all these companies in the world. Not in Western Europe, not in Europe, not in a small scale. These are big scale, large scale companies. And the few things I want to maybe highlight on this slide is first of all, I don't know how many of you know about this network readiness index, which somehow in fact takes the ICT leverage, or the ICT investment leverage when it comes to competitiveness or well-being, in the society. On the top of the chart of this index, you have, all the biggest, let's say, Nordic companies, and the Nordic countries are on the top of this index, which shows the correlation between a society that is favoring, in fact, innovation, having the right education environment, anticipating the next flow, and, having, in fact, a well-being and social environment. The second thing which is interesting is that people don't realize that, but do you know which is the location in the world which is creating the highest number of unicorn per capita after the Silicon Valley? Stockholm, yes, that's right. So these are things that, people who are, aware are aware of. But most of the majority of people don't realize that it's possible. And to be able to do that at scale, again, there was a good question earlier on. It requires a lot of concentrated talent and a mindset of talent that are really thinking broader than, let's say, only small in their country. But it's quite, unique when you think about, the unicorn. You know them. There are some here: the Lego, the Bambora, Skype, of course. These are examples of these unicorns that have been created there. The third thing, maybe, which is an interesting one, is I think equality is also one of the key differentiators that we have been seeing. It's interesting to see the larger corporations start to really understand what means diversity, and maybe even more so inclusion, because diversity without inclusion doesn't mean anywhere. But the equality of in fact, the balance of resources that we have in most of the places in the Nordics are also, in fact, an exemplarity model for many other countries in the world. And sometimes when you are you don't realize how much, in fact, equality and inclusion is part of the DNA of the organization that we are blessed to lead and work with. The last thing that, looks interesting, I would say, and surprising for many, especially on the Anglo-Saxon world, is the notion of happiness. There's the World Happiness Report of 2017, which clearly shows that the most happy countries are in the Nordics. And there's a correlation between happiness and success in this case, which many of let's say, the leaders I've been meeting have always tried to, in fact, face and oppose, in fact, happiness and success. And these, apparently, for many, these two things don't go well together. You have to pick the one that you want to go after. Well, it's a great place, where, you have an example, of this here. Back in 2014, the Microsoft in the Nordic and the Baltic Development Forum created a think tank, which is called the Top of Digital Europe. And the idea was really to think about how we can, foster this innovation spirit in a global, transformative, world, and think about, areas of education, but also, in fact, more importantly, how in this fast-paced environment, the Nordic countries can get better off partnering and working together, and to increase even more scale in the future. And interestingly enough, the latest report showed that many great insight on what are the key steps that have been made by Sweden or Denmark or Norway or Iceland. But the fascinating thing was, for the first time in the last 12-18 months, the pace of the transformation has slowed down in the Nordics. That has been always, in fact, a fast-paced, let's say, transformation. And for the last 18 months, this curve has plateaued and started to slow down in terms of growth. And when you look at this, the environment where many of the countries, many of the enterprise and private companies, many of the public sector are starting to reflect how they are going to use the digitalization to change, in fact, the way they work, the way they engage with the citizens, the way they engage with their employees, the way they gain competitiveness. This is something that we felt, is an important, task for us to keep going. And therefore, some of the key areas for us from a policy engagement and collaboration are very much around these few policy priorities that you can see here. I was mentioning, in fact, the cross-border cooperation. This is something that is increasingly important because of the common denominator between many of the countries there, from all the skill set and assets I was mentioning earlier on. Education, when you know that 60% of the kids today will have jobs that don't exist tomorrow yet, there's a way to reflect on how education should evolve in full partnership with the universities, with the college and the high schools, and have a role to play in the broad scale of the world coming. I think it's there was part of the question earlier on about policymakers and the role of governments, and I think it's an important thing that it's an end. I think there's a partnership to be happening in terms of how to reflect how these new technologies are have to push, in fact, the regulation and the laws to change and evolve. I think this is where our president and chief legal officer was mentioning we should have probably a digital Geneva convention to really reinforce the reflection of what it means to navigate on the safety, security, and privacy level. That today we see there's a gap between the advance and the pace of the technology and how the policies are being based on, let's say, very old fashioned environment and basis. I think overall promoting the digital single market in the EU is, of course, one important thing, and especially the transatlantic cooperation. And I think the last thing, which is really much around attracting the global talent. We are very proud to also bring back some of the Nordic talents who left the countries, who are coming back just to help also, in fact, foster the local economies as well. I think when you think about the examples or what technology can do to enable many of the companies to keep pace of the growth, I think these are a few examples. I mean, if you take, I was in Hanover during the Hanover Messe last week, this concentration of very much, let's say, around manufacturing and how this new technology is really helping and accelerating with the IoT environment, in fact, the efficiencies, the competitiveness of many of the Nordic countries. And Sandvik Coromant was very much, let's say, at the heart of, leveraging AI technology within, in fact, the machine tools, management to bring, in fact, even more efficiencies on the manufacturing and to keep, in fact, the pace of the global footprint. So these are early technologies already embedded to really keep the pace, there. If you take, it's not only big companies. I mean, if you take an SMB, so to speak, if I go now to Finland and Next Games, it's an interesting one. It's a very small company, leading in games. And we have been partnering to reflect on what kind of infrastructure they can use to really keep scaling, in fact, their business. And today there are about 16 million users and gamers around the world who are benefiting and enjoying, in fact, the best customer or consumer experiences that they have to. I think Merckx is another great example, number one, in that dimension. To keep, in fact, the number one position, there's no other way to reflect on how to protect the ships, how to optimize, in fact, the inventory, the rotation on the harbors, and so on, leverage, in fact, the waves, of the sea, and all these things are, in fact, directly connected by each boat to the cloud computing world and help them to navigate and increase, in fact, the security even of the passengers. I can go on and on, of course. Aker Energy in Norway is also an interesting example on how to reflect on business model innovation. This case reminds me, in fact, a few months ago I was in France and talking with another company in the energy and utility company. And at the very end of the session, I asked the leadership team, great session, great discussion, but if you were to tell me, who is your competitor? You have power plant, and you have done these investments for a long time. And I felt it was an embarrassing question, and that was not meant to. And after a few minutes, someone from the leadership team said, well, Vahe, we think that the number one competitor now is the consumer who is going to sell the electricity or the energy surplus on the marketplace. And we have not been used to get ready for that competitor. We are thinking far more on the holistic, traditional power plant. The more power plant, the more energy, the more you control. but this is somehow gone. And so the way to reflect about not taking it as a storm, but thinking ahead of time and thinking about how we can leverage the best assets that we have to be the leader in the next generation of, let's say, of usage, is an interesting discussion that we are having with all these customers, having a very balanced approach and moving forward. Iceland there is more on the work, the employee satisfaction and workplace and efficiency. And I think the red cross that you see on the bottom is very much what I was trying to mean when I mentioned that AI is at the forefront of helping solving some of the biggest society problems that we have. And healthcare is one of them. There are many initiatives in the Nordics, across healthcare, to be on a prospective and preventive healthcare, leveraging, in fact, HoloLens technology and mixed reality to do, in fact, some checking ahead of time to be able to increase, in fact, the health of the citizens. Again, there are so many things to say about leadership, about Nordics, but I think that the interesting thing over the last probably 30 years is this common denominator about talents, skill set, open economy, political stability and support of innovation, which makes probably, in fact, some of the smartest, let's say, talents that we have, not only in Seattle area, but in Europe and the rest of the world coming from the Nordics. So thank you very much.
Do you have any questions for Vahe? I'll give you one then. And I think that's the one we will have time for. When you look across the area that you're responsible for today and the Nordic countries and the Western European countries, and you compare it to other areas that you've worked with or observed, are there countries that are solving these challenges or addressing these challenges we've been discussing so far in an even better way that, from the Nordic perspective, we should look at and think that, here are some really interesting practices to emulate or steal?
I would say that the Nordic dynamic is probably one of the most vibrant one. It's quite interesting that we use the case of Estonia. Estonia has been always while very small, almost one of the very first to bet everything on the e-something. And they started with the e-parking, with the e-citizen, the e-voting, and they have been very, and they know that the positive energy is that they know that they are so small that the only one way is to innovate and push and take the risk, to fail and fail fast if they have to fail. So I think that's one example. I think other countries like the UK have done a few things in the past when it comes to engaging with the citizens as well, when it comes to public sector, and took a stand about, let's say, what we think about security, who are the partners to engage with, and be clear about, let's say, the expected outcome and the rules of engagement, as opposed to push back somehow, in fact, a decision based on, let's say, the public, discussion. I would say New Zealand, different type of country, has been also quite close in terms of compliance, ethics, to what I said, to the Nordics. And it looks like, when you have this type of values from a citizenship perspective, you are more, keen to leverage the assets that you have from a talent to do it. So I will use these few examples. Because you can take Singapore and you can take some others, but they are not necessarily comparable.
Thank you. So next time we should make sure we have even more small countries represented. Thank you so much, Vahe.
Thank you very much.